Picture this: sticky heat, the smell of salt water, and the woman who just crawled onto a deserted shore after a wreck. There's almost nothing left of her clothes, just wet shreds of fabric that show more than they hide. She's breathing heavily, trying to catch her breath, while the camera slowly lingers on her figure, making the viewer feel almost like an accomplice. This isn't some start of a cheap adult film from the internet. This is a movie that played in theaters back in the 50s. While your grandparents were out at dances, directors were already using eroticism and fear to sell tickets. Today, on 70s Cinema, we're shifting focus a bit. You guys often ask for more survival movies, and since the 70s and 80s lists hit the mark, let's go even deeper. I've put together 10 rare films from the 50s and 60s. This is the era of so-called jungle exploitation, low budgets, wild filming conditions, and a mandatory focus on female beauty in deadly situations. This is survival at its most primal. There's one movie on this list that caused a massive scandal back in the day because of a scene in the jungle. It was considered way too revealing even for the free-spirited 60s. I'll show that one near the end. So, get comfortable. And let me know in the comments, do you think modern movies have become too sanitized compared to what they were making back then? Or was this kind of on-screen exploitation just too much? Number 10. Tarzan and the Valley of Gold, 1966. Let's start with something that looks familiar on the surface, but hides a much darker, more provocative tone. When people think of Tarzan, they usually imagine family-friendly jungle adventures. But the mid-60s were changing, and this film reflects that shift perfectly. Here, the jungle isn't just the backdrop, it's a playground for raw physical tension. The plot follows a more sophisticated, James Bond-style version of the character, who finds himself in a lost city, but the real focus is on the survival of the female lead in an incredibly hostile environment. What makes this title a gem for our archive is how it treats the human body. The camera is obsessed with the physical struggle. You'll see the protagonists pushed to their limits, drenched in sweat, their clothes slowly falling apart as they navigate the dense, unforgiving terrain. The erotic undertone here isn't about explicit scenes, it's about the constant sense of vulnerability. It's that specific kind of cinema where a torn dress or a lingering shot of a heroine in distress tells a much bigger story than the dialogue ever could. It's a perfect example of how the 60s started pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable for a mainstream hero, blending the classic survivalist tropes with a new, more daring visual language. If you watch closely, you'll see why this version feels so much more adult and grounded than the ones that came before it. Now we're moving from the humid jungles to the suffocating dry heat of the African desert. Sands of the Kalahari is a masterpiece of psychological and physical survival. After a plane crash, a group of survivors is stranded in the middle of nowhere, and very quickly the thin veneer of civilization starts to peel away. This film is a goldmine for the exploitation aesthetic. The desert is a cruel stage where the heat is almost a character itself. The visual focus is intense, skin glistening with perspiration, hair matted with sand, and characters slowly losing their grip on morality as the sun beats down on them. But the real hook here is the survival hierarchy that forms within the group. The female lead is played by Susanna York, and the film doesn't shy away from her precarious position. Surrounded by men whose instincts are turning primal, her survival isn't just about finding water, it's about navigating the predatory nature of the people around her. There's a constant, thick atmosphere of sexual tension and threat that makes the survival aspect feel incredibly raw. Unlike modern survival movies that rely on fast cuts, this 1965 classic lets the camera linger. It forces you to watch the exhaustion and the slow, agonizing process of being broken down by the elements. It's gritty, it's uncomfortable, and it's undeniably provocative. By the time the baboons show up, and yes, they are a terrifying part of the survival plot, the characters have already been stripped down to their most basic animalistic versions. It's a haunting look at what happens when the thirst for water is replaced by much darker cravings. Moving on to number 8. we have a film that is practically defined by the presence of a single icon, Ursula Andress. Fresh off her legendary debut as the first Bond girl, she takes on the role of Aisha, the immortal queen of a lost city in the heart of the desert. This isn't just a survival story about reaching a destination. It's about the sheer power of visual temptation in the middle of a wasteland. The survival element here is classic adventure, but the 70s cinema appeal lies in the aesthetics. The journey through the scorching desert is treated with a very specific cinematic gaze. It's all about the contrast between the harsh, dusty environment and the untouchable, almost divine beauty of the queen. The film thrives on the male gaze of the 60s, where every costume choice and every camera angle is designed to highlight the provocative nature of the characters. As the explorers push through the sand and heat, the film builds a thick atmosphere of obsession. It's a slow-burn survivalist fantasy where the threat isn't just the elements, but the dangerous allure of a woman who has seen centuries pass. For the archive, this film serves as a perfect bridge between traditional adventure and the more daring and eroticized exploitation that would follow in the next decade. It's vibrant, it's theatrical, and it's unashamedly focused on the physical appeal of its lead, making the struggle for survival look incredibly glamorous and dangerous at the same time. Number 7 takes us back to the mid-50s for a film that caused a genuine stir across Europe and America. Liane Jungle Goddess is a prime example of what was known as naturist or sunseeker cinema. It tells the story of a girl lost in the African wild who grows up to be a tribal goddess, completely untainted by the rules of modern civilization. What makes this a must-watch for fans of raw retro cinema is how it plays with the concept of innocence. Because the main character is a child of nature, the filmmakers had a perfect excuse to bypass the strict censorship of the time. Liane moves through the jungle with a level of freedom that was unheard of in 1956. The survival scenes are mixed with a constant, lingering focus on her untamed state, often featuring shots that would have been instantly banned if they were set in a city instead of a tropical forest. The film is a fascinating look at the early days of jungle sexploitation. It's gritty in its own way, showing the dirt, the heat, and the constant physical struggle of a woman living by her own rules in the wild. When she is eventually captured and brought back to society, the tension only increases as the film explores the clash between her primal instincts and the restrictive clothing and morals of the 50s. It's a provocative, almost ethnographic look at survival that pushed the boundaries of what audiences were allowed to see under the guise of an adventure story. Now imagine the end of the world not as a fiery apocalypse, but as a quiet, sunny day on a tropical island. Produced by the legendary Roger Corman, this 1960 gem is a unique take on survival. 3 people, a wealthy businessman, his beautiful wife, and their lawyer, are the only survivors of a global disaster while on a vacation. They are trapped in a paradise that quickly turns into a prison of their own instincts. The survival element here is deeply tied to the 70s cinema vibe of tension and desire. Because they are the last of humanity, the social rules of the 50s and 60s simply vanish. The film spends a lot of time on the beach, with the camera lingering on the characters as they swim and tan, oblivious at first to the tragedy around them. But as the realization sinks in, the struggle for water and food is replaced by a much more primal struggle, the fight over the only woman left on Earth. It's a masterclass in low-budget provocation. You have the contrast of the beautiful, sun-drenched scenery against the growing ugliness of human jealousy. The dialogue is sharp, but the visual subtext is even sharper, focused on the heat, the sweat, and the mounting frustration of 3 people who have everything they need to survive physically, but nothing to keep them from destroying each other emotionally. At number 5, we have something from the early career of Russ Meyer, a director who practically invented the modern exploitation genre. While this film is lighter in tone, its visual language is pure bait. It follows a young woman, Eve, as she wanders through the wilderness and the city, constantly finding herself in situations where her clothes and her surroundings don't quite get along. This is survival through the lens of a voyeur. The film treats the wild as a backdrop for Eve's physical appeal. Whether she's trying to build a fire, navigate a forest, or simply rest by a stream, the camera is obsessed with her movements and her minimal attire. It's a fascinating relic of the early 60s, a naturist film that uses the concept of being at one with nature to show as much as the censors would allow at the time. For our archive, this is a vital entry because it shows the roots of the sexploitation boom. It's not about a complex plot. It's about the pure, raw visual of a woman in the wild. The survival aspect is almost a parody, but the way it's shot, the angles, the lighting, the focus on the skin, is exactly what would eventually evolve into the much grittier survival films of the later decades. It's colorful, it's playful, and it's unapologetically designed to catch the eye. At number 4, we're heading deep into the suffocating swamps of the Florida Everglades. Produced by the king of cult cinema, Roger Corman, Attack of the Giant Leeches is a 1959 classic that hides a surprisingly provocative core beneath its monster movie exterior. This isn't just about creatures in the water. It's about the raw, sweating tension of a small town where hidden desires are just as dangerous as the monsters. The film is famous for its bad girl archetype, played by the legendary Yvette Vickers. Her scenes in the swamp are textbook exploitation. The camera lingers on her as she navigates the humid, dangerous landscape in minimal clothing, creating a sense of constant, voyeuristic vulnerability. When the survival part kicks in, it's visceral. The idea of being trapped in an underwater cave, helpless against a slimy, primitive force, tapped into the deepest fears of the 1950s audience. For 70s cinema, this title is a must-include because of its atmosphere. You can almost feel the heat and the mosquitoes. It perfectly captures that transition era where filmmakers started realizing that monsters were just an excuse to show the raw, untamed side of human nature and the beauty of a woman in distress. It's gritty, it's low budget, and it has that unmistakable Corman touch that makes every frame feel like a piece of pulp history. Now we trade the sweltering heat for the bone-chilling cold of the Arctic. Savage Innocence is one of the most unique survival films ever made, starring Anthony Quinn as an Inuit hunter struggling to survive both the elements and the encroachment of modern, civilized law. But what makes this film a target for our archive is its surprisingly intimate and provocative subtext. Survival in the frozen north is a matter of body heat and close quarters. The film doesn't shy away from these strange customs of the north, including the famous and controversial tradition of offering one's wife to a guest to keep them warm. Set inside the cramped, dark confines of an igloo, these scenes create a tension that is incredibly raw and uncomfortable. It's a different kind of erotic bait, one born from the absolute necessity of physical contact for survival. The visual contrast is stunning. The vast, blinding white emptiness of the outside world versus the dark, sweaty, and fur-lined intimacy of the interior. The camera lingers on the faces and the layers of heavy clothing being shed, highlighting a primal way of life that feels alien yet deeply human. It's a gritty, realistic look at survival that uses the taboo nature of cultural differences to push the viewer's boundaries. It's not just a fight against the cold, it's a fight to maintain a way of life that the rest of the world finds indecent. At number 2, we're heading to a remote Pacific island where the greenery is lush, the heat is heavy, and the plants have a taste for human flesh. Voodoo Island, released in 1957, is a classic of the expedition survival subgenre. Starring the legendary Boris Karloff, it's a film that perfectly captures the eerie, provocative atmosphere of a paradise that wants you dead. The real hook here for the 70s cinema archive is the visual tension. The film doesn't waste any time putting its characters in increasingly revealing and dangerous situations. You have the classic imagery of the 50s, women navigating the thick, unforgiving jungle in minimal attire. Their vulnerability is emphasized by every rustle in the leaves. The camera lingers on the physical struggle against the environment, making the humid air and the constant threat feel almost tactile. It's a masterclass in building a raw atmosphere with a low budget. The survival isn't just about fighting monsters, it's about the psychological pressure of being trapped in a beautiful but deadly place. The contrast between the stunning tropical scenery and the primal fear of the unknown is what makes this film stand out. It's a gritty, atmospheric journey that uses the taboo nature of the island's secrets to keep you on the edge of your seat. Finally, we reached number 1. If you're looking for the absolute peak of raw survival from this era, The Sadist is the film that will leave you speechless. This isn't a jungle adventure or a desert fantasy. It's a cold, terrifying look at human cruelty. 3 teachers find themselves stranded at a roadside junkyard, only to be taken hostage by a young, psychotic killer and his equally disturbed girlfriend. This film is a masterpiece of vulnerability. Because it was shot with a very low budget, it has a documentary-like quality that makes the violence feel sickeningly real. The provocative hook here is the constant psychological and physical degradation of the characters. The heroines are pushed into the dirt, their dresses torn, their faces covered in dust and tears, while the camera stays uncomfortably close. It's a proto-slasher that predates the Texas Chainsaw Massacre by a decade, and it's arguably just as intense. What makes The Sadist the top of our list is how it uses the heat and the cramped junk-filled landscape to create total claustrophobia. There is no music, just the sound of the wind and the screams. The erotic subtext is dark and twisted, born from the absolute power that killer holds over his captives. It's a gritty, R-rated experience before the rating even existed. It's the ultimate survival nightmare, because it shows that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can encounter in the middle of nowhere isn't nature. It's another human being with nothing to lose. The films we've looked at today are more than just old relics. They represent a time when cinema wasn't afraid to be dirty, uncomfortable, and unapologetically human. These directors didn't have massive budgets or CGI. All they had was a camera, a harsh sun, and the raw vulnerability of their actors. That's what makes the survival genre of the 50s and 60s so special. It feels real because in many ways it was. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the darker corners of film history, make sure to subscribe to 70s Cinema. I'm constantly digging through the archives to find the gems that the modern world has largely forgotten. My goal is to keep these stories alive, away from the sanitized versions of history we're often sold today. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these titles surprised you the most? Do you think today's movies could learn a thing or two from the exploitation era, or have we moved past that for a reason? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And before you go, check out my previous videos on the 70s and 80s survival lists if you haven't already. The archive is deep, and we've only just scratched the surface. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.